So you probably already figured out what movie we're looking at today because of this house right here behind me, and also because you saw the name of this video when you clicked on it. Now, a lot of other people have already covered the filming locations of this movie, but I haven't. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the locations that we're going to today, I have never been to. So I'm kind of excited, and who knows, maybe we'll get lucky and we'll find something that no one else has found.
So join me today
as we check out the filming locations and celebrate the 40th anniversary of the original 1984 horror classic, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Let's go see what we can find. So the movie technically begins right here in this house behind me, although we don't see the outside of this house until a bit later in the movie. But Tina is asleep inside of this house, and the movie begins inside of Tina's nightmare. Here we are at John Marshall High School, also known as Springwood High School, in A Nightmare on Elm Street. After Tina's nightmare, we're transported to Springwood High, where we see some little girls jumping rope on the lawn in front of the school. The camera then pans to the right and we see Glenn's car pulling up with Tina and Nancy inside. Now here's the funny thing. Right over here is where the little girls were jumping rope, and then over here is where Glenn parks his car. And what I find funny is they show up to school and no one else is parked in front of the school. They're able to just pull up and park their car wherever they want. But for some reason, Glenn parks his car all the way down at the end of the block, and then over here, this is the front entrance to the school. So you can see it's a pretty long walk from where Glenn parks his car, but I don't know, I guess this is Glenn's favorite parking spot or something. But so then Glenn, Tina, and Nancy are walking down this sidewalk past this wall. You can see it still looks the same. Pretty much everything here in front of the school still looks the same. They then get to the front of the school and they're standing there talking about Tina's nightmare. And behind Tina, you can see this section of the school. Behind Nancy, you can see this house across the street, and Glenn then runs up the steps and through the front doors of the school. Now this is not the last time that we see the front of Springwood High and the interiors of Springwood High School. That was filmed at a completely different school altogether, and we see that a little bit later in the movie. So we now get a very quick shot of the outside of Tina's house where she's inside with Glenn and Nancy, and they did actually film inside of this house as well. Now just a little bit later, after Rod comes over and everybody's gone to sleep, Tina is now having another nightmare and she heads into the backyard and then into the alley behind this house. This is the very spot where that scene took place, where Freddy is walking down the alley and his arms extend, covering the entire width of the alley. On Santa Monica Boulevard in East Hollywood, you'll find the Cahuenga branch of the public library, and this stood in as the police station in Nightmare on Elm Street. The first shot that we get of Nancy's house is a very quick establishing shot right before she leaves for school. And there's lots of quick establishing shots just like that of the Elm Street house sprinkled all throughout the movie. Now, unfortunately, the people who now own the house, I believe the house was sold again not too long ago, and the people who now own it have made it obvious that they're not interested in the attention from Nightmare on Elm Street. They've planted 2 trees in the front yard, they've got a hedge going all across the front, and even where the gate is, they have a large plant blocking the front door of the house. So unfortunately, this is kind of the best shot that you can get of the house. So the next morning, Nancy's at the door and off to school, even though her friend was just murdered about 8 hours ago. We see her walk right past this house, and you can clearly see the address. She then moves past this window, which has changed a little bit, and then as she gets to right about here, she stops, and behind her you can see some arched bricks, which would have been right about here, and they were here up until just a couple of years ago. Sometime within the last few years, this section of the house was removed. But as Nancy stopped here, she looks over in this direction and she notices a strange man in a suit standing on the corner staring at her. Now, although she's looking over in this direction, the corner that the man is standing on is actually on this side of the street, right down here at the end of the block. So right over there, that's where Nancy was walking, and then she looks over in that direction, but where the man is standing is actually right over here. He's standing right next to this tree. These 2 trees still look exactly the same as they did 40 years ago. So Nancy continues walking down the sidewalk when suddenly she's yanked into the bushes by Rod, who pleads his innocence to her, but all of a sudden Nancy's dad comes out of nowhere and tells Rod to get on the ground. Of course, Rod takes off. He's running down the street right towards the same tree where the man in the suit was standing just a few moments ago. All of a sudden, a couple of cop cars come out of nowhere and they take Rod into custody. So right over here is where they would have been putting Rod in handcuffs. Nancy's dad would have been standing somewhere right about here, talking to Nancy, who's supposedly standing over here on the sidewalk. And there is still so much stuff here that you can match up. That sign at the end of the street, the garage, that utility pole, the tree, which of course I already mentioned. So much stuff here still looks the same. This right here behind me is John Burroughs Middle School, and this is where they filmed all of the interiors for Springwood High School. And it kind of looks like John Marshall High. That's probably why they used it for the interiors, because it somewhat matches up. Now, I don't know why they don't use the actual interiors of John Marshall High. There's probably a reason. I just don't know what it is. But all of the interiors that you see for Springwood High School were filmed inside of this building, except for the boiler room. So lucky for us, Paul over at thenandnowmovielocations.com had some really great photos that he took back in 2018, and he was nice enough to share them with me. Side note, they also filmed the interiors of the police station inside John Burroughs as well. But now back to Nancy heading to the boiler room. This building right here behind me, this is the old Lincoln Heights jail, and it's been closed for a very long time, used for a filming location for a lot of different movies, and right down there in the basement, that was Freddy's boiler room. Anytime you see the boiler room in Nightmare on Elm Street, in the beginning of the movie, at the end of the movie, all of that was filmed right down there in the basement. Now, unfortunately, the building is closed to the public because of asbestos and who knows what else is going on in there. So we can't go inside, but this is the spot. Amazingly, Paul from thenandnowmovielocations.com also had some photos of the boiler room that he took back in 2016. And this is really awesome because not a lot of people have been down there, and he was able to match up some really great shots. And I want to give him a huge thank you for letting me share these photos with you. You can find a link to his website in the description. So once Nancy wakes up from her nightmare, she freaks out and runs out of class, as she then goes to the front of the school, and we once again see her standing in front of John Marshall High. Nancy decides to have a nightmare while Glenn is standing by watching her so he can pull her out of her nightmare in case things get really bad. We see Nancy walking down the sidewalk in front of her house, and she's then suddenly in the alley behind Tina's house. But when Nancy looks back to say something to Glenn, we see Glenn pop out from the tree that's in front of Nancy's house. Nancy walks through a door, and she's now suddenly in front of the police station. So right here is where Nancy goes running up this little hill, and she looks into this window into Rod's cell. Ugh, that window's nasty. Nancy then stands up and she walks this way, and right over here there was a large hedge, and Nancy's standing right about here, and she calls out to Glenn, "Are you there?"
I'm here.
All right, with that, I'm getting out of here. Nancy is now back in reality, and she grabs Glenn and they head to the police station to try and save Rod. We see Nancy and Glenn come running up the front steps, and it was right here where Glenn, aka Johnny Depp in his very first acting role, was standing. And then a few seconds later, they see their friend Rod get murdered. Right now we're in the Evergreen Cemetery in the Boyle Heights area of Los Angeles, and right over here is where they were having Rod Lane's funeral, and there's a couple of different ways that you can tell that this is the spot. This tombstone, as well as this tombstone, this one, and also this one right here can all be seen prominently in that scene when the camera pans from left to right. Now, after the funeral service is done, it makes it seem like Nancy's mom's car is parked right over there, but actually they're parked over that way on the other side of the cemetery. And then after the funeral, Nancy is sitting right here when her mom comes over and takes Nancy, and they go walking over to their car, which would have been parked right here. And the way that you can really tell is by this grave. This can clearly be seen behind them. Now, as they're getting into their car, Nancy's father is watching them. He's standing right over here. Now, there's a couple of things that you can see behind Nancy's dad, mostly this tall monument-like grave, and then there's also a couple of statues over in this area that you can see behind him. After a quick conversation with Nancy's dad, Nancy's mom drives off down this path. You can see the two windows on the side of this building, which have since been filled in, but you can still see where the windows were. Now, although Nancy's mom's car is parked right here, and it makes it seem like the funeral service is over in this area because this is where Nancy's mom comes walking from, in reality, the spot where they have Rod's funeral is all the way over there on the other side of those palm trees in section I. Right now, I'm currently on Mulholland Drive, right off of the 405 freeway, just before it goes into the San Fernando Valley. And this building right here behind me is the American Jewish University. But in Nightmare on Elm Street, this is the sleep institute that Nancy's mom brings Nancy to, and they hook her up to those machines, and Roger Rabbit tries to figure out what's going on with Nancy. This building is, of course, just used for the exteriors, just a quick establishing shot of the outside of the building. But the cool thing is, I don't think anything has changed on this building in the last 40 years. Now, that's pretty awesome. Now, this is, of course, the bridge where Glenn and Nancy are talking about how to not die in their nightmares while Glenn enjoys a tasty burger. And there's a lot of debate online about where this bridge actually is, because there's a lot of bridges around here, and a few of them look just like this one. But this is the correct bridge. This is the bridge that connects Court C to Linney Avenue. Now, you probably already noticed that most of the buildings here have changed, but there's still a couple of things that tell us that the bridge that I'm currently standing on is the correct one. First of all, you can see that bridge behind Glenn and Nancy, and you can also see the windows on this house behind them as well. The windows are now covered by trees, but if we walk down this way a little bit, you can now see those windows on the side of the house, and you can see that this house matches up perfectly with the one that you see behind Glenn and Nancy. Now, just like Glenn, I too eat when I'm nervous.
Whenever I get nervous, I eat.
And I'm really nervous right now. This looks delicious. After hanging out with Glenn, Nancy comes home to find that her mom has left a little surprise for her on the house. Her mom has added bars to all of the windows. Later that night, Nancy calls Glenn and his crop top. Now don't be shy, Glenn, no need to cover it. They have a conversation looking at each other from their bedroom windows because their houses are right across from each other. Nancy reminds Glenn,
"Don't fall asleep."
But does Glenn listen? Of course not. Now, while Glenn's upstairs getting killed, his parents are standing right here on the porch enjoying a drink. Glenn's dad was leaning up against that pillar on the left. They eventually discover what happened to Glenn, and we see all of the authorities right here in front of Glenn's house. Of course, this tree and this fence weren't here 40 years ago. Nancy decides enough is enough. Tonight, she's gonna pull Freddy out of her nightmare and into the real world, and she starts setting up booby traps all around her house to get Freddy when she pulls him in. You know what? This sounds really familiar. Anyways, Nancy is successful at pulling Freddy into the real world, and now the fun begins.
Yes! Yes!
Nancy starts yelling for her dad out of one of the broken windows, and he finally hears her and comes running across the street. I don't know how he didn't hear all that other stuff that was going on. Nancy eventually figures out how to beat Freddy, and everything is now all good. Everything appears to have gone back to normal. Her mom is now there, and a few seconds later, Glenn's car pulls up with all of her dead friends inside. Now, it's kind of hard to get the exact shot because of these cars parked in front of the house, but right here is where Glenn's car pulls up, and you can tell by that large tree across the street, along with that house on the left that has the red awning above the door. Both of those things still look the same. So Glenn's car was parked right here. It then drives off down Genesee Avenue. Kind of impossible to get the shot now, but the car would have drove off this way, and then over here is actually where the girls were jumping rope in the front yard of the Elm Street house, but you can't see that anymore. However, you can see this tree behind them. They've just cut off that one branch that would have been right there. And then, of course, the final shot of the movie is Nancy's mom getting yanked through the front door. Hello? Is anybody in here? What am I saying? Of course nobody's in here. All right, that is gonna do it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. No! Okay, Freddy, we're done. You can relax. You okay? Please tell me you got it. Okay. Okay, you got the footage, right? You got it? Okay, now let's go eat this cake.